He, a widowed and powerful tycoon, but lonely and withdrawn, seeks a nanny for his sensitive son. She, a kind-hearted young woman, but tormented by a secret and deep guilt. With her sweetness, Olivia wins over Leo, and Arthur notices the light she brings, feeling drawn to her authenticity. Love grows between them, but the weight of Olivia's past prevents her from fully embracing happiness. In a moment of profound vulnerability, she hesitates and tries to pull away, her guilt consuming her. Prepare for a twist where high society, enemies, and the past will try to destroy the tycoon's love for the guilty nanny. But unconditional forgiveness and the strength of their love can heal all wounds, freeing a soul from guilt. Watch this story until the end. You will be amazed by this story. If you like stories of love, romance, subscribe to this channel, leave your comment. Every day we post videos like this. Continuing, the morning sun streamed through the linen curtains of the small kitchenette in Greenwich Village, waking Emily Carter from the restless sleep that had plagued her for months. At 28, she carried a weight on her delicate shoulders that seemed disproportionate to her stature. Her chestnut hair fell in natural waves over her angelic face, but her green eyes revealed a deep sadness that she tried to hide behind forced smiles. Emily checked her bank balance on her phone and sighed. Once again, the paltry sum reminded her of the harsh reality. She urgently needed a job. Not just any job, but something that paid enough to clear the debts she inherited when her mother succumbed to aggressive cancer. The medical bills, the loans to fund experimental treatment overseas, it had all been in vain. And now she carried not only the pain of loss, but also the guilt of having failed to save the only person who truly loved her. Across town, in the imposing mansion in the Upper East Side, Richard Sterling watched his son through the window of his office. Alex played alone in the immense garden, his movements slow and melancholic, contrasting with the energy a 6-year-old should have. The boy raised his dark eyes towards the window and waved shyly to his father. Richard returned the gesture, but his heart constricted at the sight of the sadness that mirrored his own. At 38, Richard had built a financial empire that few dared to challenge. His investment and technology firm moved billions, and his name was respected in the most exclusive circles of New York. But all that power could not fill the void that had taken over his life since losing Sarah, his wife, 3 years ago. Cancer had been cruel and swift, taking with it not only the woman he loved, but also his ability to trust in love again. Alex needed more than he could offer. The boy rarely spoke, spent hours drawing somber figures, and withdrew whenever Richard tried to approach him. The previous nannies had given up one after another, claiming the boy was too difficult or that the atmosphere of the house was too heavy. That Tuesday morning, Emily adjusted the only blazer she owned and headed to yet another job interview. The Human Resources Agency had mentioned a nanny position for a wealthy family, but had not given details about the employer. She only knew that the salary offered was 3 times higher than anything she had earned in recent months. The address led her to an imposing gate where a digital intercom contrasted with the perfectly manicured lawns. Emily took a deep breath, trying to shake off the feeling of not belonging in that world. Her simple clothes and worn purse seemed to scream her financial situation amidst such opulence. "Emily Carter for the interview," she announced into the intercom, her voice slightly trembling. Moments later, an elegant woman in her 50s greeted her at the entrance. "I'm Eleanor, the housekeeper. Mr. Sterling is waiting for you in the office." Sterling. The name hit her like lightning. Richard Sterling, the tycoon who frequently appeared in financial newspapers, the widower whose public appearances had become increasingly rare after his wife's death. Emily felt her legs weaken, but she forced herself to maintain composure as she followed Eleanor through the marble hallways. The office was an extension of its owner's personality, sophisticated, imposing, and coldly elegant. Richard stood by the window, his broad back tense under the impeccable suit. When he turned to greet her, Emily had to make a conscious effort not to lose her breath. His blue eyes were as intense as she had seen in the photos, but they carried a melancholy that the cameras never captured. "Miss Carter," he said, extending his hand. His voice was deep, controlled. "Thank you for coming." The handshake was firm, but Emily noticed the calculated coldness in his gestures. It was as if he maintained an invisible barrier between himself and the world. "I'll be direct," Richard continued, indicating a chair. "My son needs special care. He has been struggling since he lost his mother. The previous nannies couldn't handle his particularities." At that moment, the door opened silently, and a small boy with dark hair peeked through the crack. Alex watched the stranger with cautious curiosity, his large, expressive eyes studying every detail of Emily's face. Without thinking, Emily stood up and crouched down to the boy's level. "Hi, Alex," she said softly. "I'm Emily. I really like your drawing on the refrigerator in the kitchen. It's a dinosaur, isn't it?" Alex blinked, surprised. No one had noticed his drawing before. He nodded shyly. Richard watched the interaction with heightened attention. There was something in the way Emily addressed his son, a naturalness that the other candidates did not possess. Alex, who usually hid during interviews, remained there, clearly interested in the conversation. "Do you like dinosaurs?" Alex asked, his voice low but genuinely curious. "I do, especially the Triceratops. It had 3 horns to defend itself, but it was a vegetarian. Did you know that?" The boy's eyes lit up for the first time in months. Richard felt something stir in his chest, a long-forgotten sensation. Watching Emily interact with Alex, he saw not only a potential nanny, but perhaps the key to returning joy to his son. "When could you start?" he asked, interrupting the conversation between the two. Emily started working at the Sterling mansion the next day, still incredulous at the speed of her hiring. The generous salary represented not only the solution to her debts, but also an opportunity to start over in an environment where her past would remain buried, or so she hoped. In the first few days, she established a careful routine with Alex. The boy, initially shy, began to open up gradually. She discovered that he loved adventure stories and had a fertile imagination that had been stifled by the melancholy of the house. When Emily suggested they build a fort with sheets in the playroom, Alex laughed for the first time in months, a crystal-clear sound that echoed through the empty hallways of the mansion. Richard heard this laughter from his office and felt a strange pang in his chest. He hadn't heard his son's genuine joy in a long time, and the transformation was evident. Alex ran through the hallways looking for Emily, told elaborate stories at dinner, and even smiled when Richard came home from work. But it was precisely this change that disturbed Richard. He observed Emily with growing interest, noticing how her eyes lit up when Alex told a story, how she bit her lower lip when concentrated, how her hair caught the sunlight when they played in the garden. She was different from the women in his social circle, authentic, warm, devoid of the artificiality that wearied him. "Dad, Emily said she's going to teach me how to fly a kite tomorrow," exclaimed Alex during dinner, his eyes shining with enthusiasm. "Is that so?" Richard looked up at Emily, who was serving dessert. She blushed slightly under his attention. "You know how to fly kites, Emily?" "My mom taught me when I was little," she replied, her voice slightly strained when mentioning her mother. "It's a tradition I'd like to share with Alex." Richard noticed the shadow that crossed her face when she spoke of her mother, but he didn't comment. Instead, he surprised himself by saying, "Maybe I can join you. It's been a while since I've had a free Saturday." Alex practically jumped out of his chair with excitement, but Emily seemed uncomfortable with the prospect. "It's not necessary, Mr. Sterling. I'm sure you have more important engagements." "Richard," he corrected, his eyes meeting hers. "And no, I have nothing more important than spending time with my son." On Saturday, Richard came down to the garden wearing jeans and a polo shirt, a more casual version of himself that Emily hadn't seen yet. He looked younger, more approachable, and she had to constantly remind herself to maintain the appropriate professional distance. As they helped Alex fly the kite, their hands occasionally touched when adjusting the string. Each accidental touch sent electric waves through Emily's arms, and she realized that Richard was also affected by the proximity. When he positioned himself behind her to help her control the kite, his warm breath on her neck made her tremble, involuntarily. "You have a knack for this," Richard murmured, his voice lower than necessary. "It's just practice," Emily replied, trying to ignore the heat that spread through her body. Alex, oblivious to the tension between the adults, ran through the lawn, chasing the shadow of the kite, his laughter filling the air. It was a moment of pure happiness that neither of them had experienced in years. "Thank you," Richard said suddenly, watching his son, "for bringing him back to life." Emily stared at him, surprised by the vulnerability in his voice. "He just needed someone who believed in him." "And you? What do you need, Emily?" The question caught her off guard, touching on wounds she was trying to keep closed. "I just need to take care of Alex," she replied quickly, looking away. Richard realized he had crossed a boundary, but something in her reaction piqued his curiosity. There were secrets behind those green eyes, and he found himself wanting to uncover them. The following week brought a comfortable routine, but one charged with unspoken tension. Richard began to come home earlier from work, always finding excuses to spend more time where Emily and Alex were. She noticed his lingering glances, the way he found reasons to touch her casually, a hand on her shoulder as he passed, fingers that lingered when handing her something. Emily struggled against the growing attraction. Richard Sterling was everything she couldn't have: powerful, wealthy, respected, and she was just a nanny with a past that shamed her deeply. The scars on her soul constantly reminded her that she didn't deserve happiness, especially not with a man like him. The tension reached a critical point on a rainy Thursday. Alex had a cold and was sleeping early, leaving Richard and Emily alone in the living room. She organized the toys, while he pretended to read reports on the sofa, but in reality watched her every move. "Emily," he called softly. She turned around, finding him standing a few steps away. His blue eyes were intense, filled with an emotion she recognized but feared to name. "I know there's something between us," he said, taking a step forward. "I feel it every time we're in the same room." "Mr. Sterling, Richard, this can't happen," she murmured, backing away until her back touched the wall. "Why?" He came closer, one hand leaning on the wall next to her head. "We're two free adults." "Because I work for you. Because we're from different worlds. Because I—" Her voice failed, the real reasons stuck in her throat. Richard studied her face, seeing fear where he expected to find reciprocity. "Because you what, Emily?" Before she could answer, the sharp sound of the intercom cut through the tension. Eleanor appeared at the door, clearly embarrassed to interrupt. "Mr. Sterling, there's a woman at the gate. She says it's urgent and that she needs to speak with Miss Emily. She identified herself as Carla Santos." Emily's blood ran cold. Carla, the nurse from the hospital where her mother had been treated. The only person alive who knew the whole truth about what had happened in her mother's last days. The only person who could destroy the new life she was trying to build. Richard noticed how Emily paled instantly, her body trembling visibly. "Do you know this person?" "I need to answer." "That," she managed to say, her voice almost inaudible. It's about my mother. Without waiting for permission, Emily ran towards the gate, leaving Richard with more questions than answers and the disturbing certainty that Emily's secrets were about to invade his orderly life. Emily found Carla Santos standing outside the gate, the same serious and determined expression she used to have at the hospital. The middle-aged nurse held a folder of documents against her chest, and her eyes revealed an urgency that made Emily's stomach churn. "Carla, what are you doing here?" she asked, keeping her voice low as she approached the gate. "I need to talk." "To you, Emily, it's about your mother's medication." Carla glanced nervously at the imposing mansion behind Emily. "I didn't know you were working for the Sterlings. How did you find me?" "Your old neighbor gave me the address." "Emily, this can't wait. The Rodriguez family is asking questions. They want to know why the treatment was stopped so abruptly." Emily felt the world spin around her. The Rodriguez family. The wealthy relatives who had offered financial help for her mother's treatment, but with an impossible condition that she had rejected at the last moment. The decision that still haunted her every night. "I can't talk about this now," she murmured, glancing over her shoulder to make sure Richard wasn't nearby. "They're threatening to sue the hospital for medical malpractice. If that goes ahead, you know the truth will come out, don't you, about the choice you made?" "I didn't have a choice," Emily blurted out, then immediately lowered her voice. "You know that better than anyone." Carla sighed deeply. "I know you did what you thought was right, but now you need to decide whether you're going to tell your version or let them create their own narrative. Call me by the end of the week." After Carla left, Emily remained standing at the gate for several minutes, trying to gather the strength to return to the mansion. When she finally went inside, she found Richard in the hall, clearly waiting for her. "Is everything okay?" he asked, approaching. "You look shaken." "Just some lingering family issues," she replied evasively. "How's Alex?" Richard didn't let himself be diverted from the subject. "Emily, if you're facing some problem, maybe I can help. I have contacts, resources." "It's not something money can solve," she interrupted, more sharply than she intended. The response hit Richard unexpectedly. He was used to solving problems with power and influence, but the pain in Emily's eyes suggested something much deeper and more personal. In the following days, a strange intimacy developed between them. Alex's cold had worsened, requiring constant care, and Richard decided to work from home to monitor his son's condition. This meant that he and Emily spent hours together in the boys' room, taking turns measuring his temperature, administering medication, and telling stories to distract him. During one of the nights, when Alex had a high fever, Richard found Emily sleeping in the armchair next to the boy's bed, a blanket slipping off her shoulders. He carefully covered her, his fingers accidentally brushing her face. Emily awoke with the touch, her eyes meeting his in the semi-darkness. "How is he?" she asked sleepily. "Better. The fever broke an hour ago," Richard whispered. "You should go to your room and rest." "I can't leave him alone when he's sick," she admitted. "I used to do this with my mom when—" Her voice trailed off, but Richard noticed the sudden pain that crossed her face. "You took care of your mother when she was sick?" Emily nodded slowly. "Cancer. The last months were difficult." Richard sat on the arm of the armchair, closer than would be appropriate. "I'm sorry. I know what it's like to lose someone like that." "At least you had time to say goodbye properly to Sarah," Emily said softly. "At least she knew how much you loved her." The observation touched Richard deeply. "How do you know about Sarah?" "Alex sometimes talks about her. He shows me pictures. She was beautiful." Richard looked at his sleeping son, then back at Emily. "You're like her, you know. Not physically, but in the way you care for people. Sarah had that gift too." The comment created a moment of dangerous intimacy. Emily could see the vulnerability in Richard's eyes, the same pain that she carried. Without thinking, she reached out and lightly touched his face. She would be proud of the man you've become, the father you are to Alex. Richard covered her hand with his, holding it against his face. Sometimes I feel like I've failed him, that I closed myself off so much in my own grief that I forgot he was suffering too. You haven't failed, Emily murmured. You were just trying to survive. I understand that. And you? How did you survive losing your mother? Emily withdrew her hand abruptly, the moment of intimacy broken by the question that touched too close to her secrets. I just survived. Richard perceived the immediate change in her posture. Emily, what really happened to your mother? Why do you always change the subject when we talk about her? Because some wounds are too deep to be shared, she replied. Getting up from the armchair, I need to check Alex's temperature, but Richard held her wrist gently, preventing her from walking away. I also have wounds that I thought would never heal until you came here. The confession hung between them like a dangerous revelation. Emily felt her heart race, but along with the attraction came the familiar panic. Men like Richard Sterling weren't interested in women like her, women with dark pasts and questionable choices. Richard, you don't really know me, she said, trying to break free from his touch. Then let me know you, he replied, moving closer. Let me understand why you hide behind this wall of pain. For a moment, Emily almost gave in, almost told him about the impossible proposal from the Rodriguez family, about the terrible choice she had to make in her mother's last days, about the guilt that was devouring her from within. But then Alex stirred in the bed, moaning softly, and reality came crashing back. She was just the nanny. Richard was her employer. And between them were secrets that could destroy everything. I'll get him some more water, she said finally, freeing herself from Richard's touch and leaving the room before she could do something she would regret forever. Richard remained standing in the dark room, watching the way Emily had fled from him once again, and wondering what kind of secret could cause such pain in such a gentle woman. 3 weeks after the episode with Alex's fever, the seemingly tranquil routine of the Sterling mansion was brutally interrupted by a call at 3 a.m. Richard awoke to the insistent ringing of the phone, his mind still foggy when he answered. Mr. Sterling, this is from Alex's school, a tense voice said. There's been an accident during the overnight camping trip. An unexpected storm hit the area and some children were injured. Alex is okay, but he specifically asked for Emily. We're taking the children to New York Presbyterian Hospital. Richard jumped out of bed, his heart racing. I'm going there now. Minutes later, he was knocking on Emily's bedroom door. She answered in her nightgown, her hair disheveled and her eyes still sleepy, but immediately alert at the sight of his expression. Alex is in the hospital, Richard said quickly. Accident on the camping trip. We need to go now. Emily didn't hesitate. Give me 2 minutes. In the car, Richard drove with his hands clenched on the steering wheel, while Emily tried to reach Alex by cell. Phone without success. The torrential rain made visibility almost nil, and every minute felt like an eternity. He'll be okay, Emily murmured, more to herself than to Richard. Alex is strong. What if he's not? Richard's voice was laden with an anguish he rarely let show. What if I lose him too? I don't know if I could survive that, Emily. She looked at him, seeing for the first time the man behind the controlled facade of the businessman. Without thinking, she reached out and touched his arm. You're not going to lose him. We're not going to let that happen. The word "we" echoed between them with an unexpected weight. At the hospital, they found Alex on a gurney in the emergency room, with a cut on his forehead and his right arm bandaged, but conscious and relatively well. His eyes lit up when he saw Emily approach. "Emily, you came!" he exclaimed, extending his good arm towards her. Emily hugged him carefully, feeling him tremble. "Of course I came, honey. How you feeling?" "I was scared," Alex admitted in a low voice. "When the tree fell near our tent, I just wanted you and Dad here." Richard approached, running his hand through his son's hair. "We're here now. You were very brave." The doctor explained that Alex would need to spend the night in observation due to a mild concussion, but that there was no major risk. Richard insisted on staying, and Emily naturally settled into the armchair next to the hospital bed. During the early morning hours, Alex woke up several times, agitated and confused by the effects of the concussion. Emily sang softly to calm him, while Richard held his tiny hand. In one of the most critical moments, when Alex began to cry, asking for his mother, Emily and Richard instinctively positioned themselves on either side of the bed, forming a protective shield around the boy. "Mommy can't come," Alex whispered, tears running down his injured face. "No, honey, but you have two people here who love you very much," Emily said softly, her eyes meeting Richard's over Alex's head. "Does Emily really love me?" Alex asked, looking at Richard with hopeful eyes. Richard felt his chest tighten. "I think she does, son, and I love her too." The words came out before he could fully process them. Emily's eyes widened, but before she could respond, Alex smiled for the first time since the accident. "So now we're a real family." The silence that followed was charged with possibilities and terrors. Richard and Emily stared at each other for a long moment, both realizing that they had crossed an irreversible line. "Yes, honey," Emily murmured finally, her voice choked with emotion. "We're a family." Alex finally fell asleep, but Richard and Emily remained awake, each processing the implications of what had just happened. Around 5 in the morning, when the first rays of sun filtered through the window of the hospital room, Richard got up and walked to the window. "I wasn't lying," he said softly without turning to face her. "About loving you." Emily felt her heart race. "Richard, I know this complicates everything. I know you work for me, that our situation is delicate. But almost losing Alex tonight made me realize that life is too short to waste on social conventions." He turned to face her, his blue eyes intense in the soft morning light. "You brought my son back to life. You brought me back to life. I can't pretend anymore that what I feel for you is just gratitude." Emily stood up slowly, approaching him. Each step was a struggle between desire and fear, between what her heart wanted and what her mind knew was impossible. "I love you too," she admitted finally, her voice almost a whisper. "But Richard, there are things about me you don't know, things that might completely change what you feel for me." Richard took a step forward, his hands touching her face gently. "I don't care what happened in your past. I care about who you are now, here, with me and Alex." "You say that now, but—" Richard interrupted her words with a soft kiss, charged with all the repressed emotion of the last few weeks. Emily melted against him, all her fears momentarily silenced by the intensity of the moment. When they broke apart, Richard rested his forehead against hers. "We're going to make this work, Emily. I don't know how, but we'll find a way." At that moment, with Alex sleeping peacefully in the hospital bed and the city waking up outside, they allowed themselves to believe that love could truly overcome any obstacle. But across the street, without either of them noticing, a photographer from the National Enquirer captured the intimate moment between the powerful Richard Sterling and his nanny, an image that in a few hours would be in the headlines of the tabloids, starting the scandal that would threaten to destroy everything they had built. The next morning, Richard woke up with a lightness he hadn't experienced in years. The kiss with Emily at the hospital had changed everything, and for the first time since Sarah's death, he could visualize a future filled with possibilities. Alex was recovering well at home, and the promise of a new family life seemed finally within reach. That feeling lasted exactly until he opened his cell phone and saw dozens of missed calls from his publicist, Mark Olson. "Richard, "Where the hell have you been?" Mark exploded as soon as he answered. "I need you to come to the office now. It's an emergency." "What happened?" "Better you see it in person, but brace yourself. Your private life has just become public domain." At the Sterling Investments office, Mark was visibly upset, several newspapers scattered on the table. The headline of the city's biggest tabloid screamed, "Tycoon falls for Nanny. Richard Sterling caught in secret romance with son's caretaker." The photo occupied the entire front page, Richard and Emily in the tender kiss at the hospital, their silhouettes outlined against the illuminated window. The image, although taken from a distance, perfectly captured the intimacy of the moment. "How did they get this photo?" Richard asked, feeling the fury rise in his chest. "Someone was monitoring the hospital. They were probably alerted about Alex's accident and waited for the perfect opportunity." Mark opened another newspaper. "But that's just the beginning, Richard. They're digging into Emily. Look at this." The second newspaper carried a smaller, but equally devastating article. "Who is Emily Carter? The mysterious past of Richard Sterling's new flame." The report mentioned her mother's death from cancer, the hospital debts, and more worryingly, an anonymous source that suggested irregularities in the medical treatment and a possible family dispute over inheritance. Richard felt his stomach churn. "What irregularities? What dispute?" "I don't know, but they clearly have someone feeding them information. Richard, you need to end this now. Your business reputation is at stake. Shareholders are already asking questions." At that exact moment, Richard's phone rang. It was Eleanor, the housekeeper, her voice tense. "Mr. Sterling, there are reporters at the gate, many of them. And Miss Emily, she's locked herself in her room after seeing the newspapers. She's very upset." Richard stormed out of the office, leaving Mark shouting instructions about crisis management. During the drive home, his phone didn't stop ringing. Journalists, concerned shareholders, members of New York high society feigning concern while seeking gossip. At home, he found Emily in the back garden, sitting on the swing where she used to play with Alex, with the newspapers beside her. Her tears had dried, leaving only an expression of utter defeat. "Emily," he called softly, approaching carefully. She looked up, and Richard saw there a deep pain that went far beyond the exposure in the press. "They know, Richard, about my mother, about what happened in her last days." "What exactly happened?" Emily took a deep breath, finally ready to confess the secret that tormented her. "In my mother's last days, when the doctors said there was nothing more they could do, a wealthy family appeared, the Rodriguezes. Their son had died in an accident, and they wanted to honor his memory by funding experimental treatment overseas. For my mother." Richard sat down beside her, awaiting the rest of the story. "But there was a condition," Emily continued, her voice breaking. "They wanted me to sign a document agreeing to marry their cousin, a 50-year-old man I had never seen. It was an arrangement. My mother would stay alive, but I would become their property." "You refused," Richard said, understanding. "I refused, and my mother died 3 days later. The Rodriguezes spread the word that I had condemned my own mother to death out of pride, that I was an unnatural daughter who chose my freedom over her life." Emily looked directly at Richard, and "Sometimes I believe they're right." Richard felt a wave of tenderness and outrage. "Emily, you made the right choice. No one should—" "You don't understand," she interrupted, standing up abruptly. "They're going to use this against you now. They're going to say that you're involved with a woman who let her own mother die. Your reputation, your business, Alex's custody, everything could be compromised because of me." Before Richard could answer, Eleanor came running through the garden. "Mr. Sterling, there's a lady at the gate saying she needs to speak with you urgently. She identified herself as Mrs. Beatrice Rodriguez." Emily's blood ran cold. "She's here." "Who is Beatrice Rodriguez?" Richard asked. "The matriarch of the family, the woman who orchestrated the proposal for my mother. Emily turned. To him, the panic evident in her eyes. Richard, she didn't come here by chance. If she's here, it's because she's planning something. Mrs. Beatrice Rodriguez was a woman of 60, elegantly dressed, with a cold smile that didn't reach her eyes. She was received in the main room of the mansion, where she examined every detail of the decor, as if she were evaluating the value of everything. "Mr. Sterling," she said in a sweet but venomous voice, "it's a pleasure to finally meet you in person. I've read a lot about your business in the financial pages." "Mrs. Rodriguez," Richard replied coldly, "how can I help you?" "Actually, I believe I can help you. I see that you've become involved with our dear Emily." She smiled at Emily, who remained tense beside Richard. "I hope she's told you the truth about our family history." "She has," Richard said, "and I don't see any relevance to our conversation." "Ah, but there is. You see, I have in my possession some interesting documents, medical records, recordings of conversations, emails, evidence that Emily not only refused our help, but also influenced other family members to do the same when they offered less compromising alternatives." Emily paled. "That's not true, isn't it? What about your cousin Sophie, who also had cancer at the time? Do you remember how you convinced her to refuse our treatment because you believed we were bad people? Sophie died 2 weeks later. Sophie was terminal. The doctor said there was no chance. But our clinic in Switzerland had an experimental protocol that could have given her a few more months that she lost because of your influence." Mrs. Rodriguez opened her purse and withdrew a folder. "I have here statements from 3 family members confirming that you actively discouraged alternative treatments. To the press, this will look like a pattern of behavior." Richard stepped forward, his voice laden with authority. "What exactly do you want?" "Simple. I want Emily to disappear from your life. Today, forever. In exchange, these documents will remain filed away, and I will personally make sure that the press stops investigating her past." "And if I refuse?" Richard asked. Mrs. Rodriguez smiled, coldly. "Then tomorrow, every newspaper in New York will have the full story of how Emily Carter condemned not 1, but 2 women to death for her selfish convictions. Would your company, which depends so much on public trust, survive the scandal of being associated with someone like that? And how would Child Protective Services react to learning that little Alex is under the care of a woman with this past?" The silence that followed was deafening. Richard looked at Emily, seeing the utter despair in her eyes. She had already lost everything once. Now she was about to lose it again, and this time she would take Richard and Alex with her. "I need time to decide," Richard said finally. "Of course, you have until tomorrow at noon. After that, I can no longer control what the press publishes." Mrs. Rodriguez stood up elegantly. "It was a pleasure meeting you, Mr. Sterling. I hope you make the right decision." After she left, Richard and Emily remained silent in the room, the weight of the blackmail hanging between them like a death sentence for their newfound love. Richard spent the entire night pacing the hallways of the mansion, his mind a storm of conflicts. On the rational side, he knew that Mrs. Rodriguez had the power to destroy not only his reputation, but also to jeopardize Alex's custody. On the emotional side, the idea of losing Emily tore him apart in a way he hadn't experienced since Sarah's death. The next morning, he found Emily in the kitchen preparing Alex's breakfast with trembling hands. She hadn't slept. That was evident from the deep circles under her eyes and the pallor of her skin. "Emily, we need to talk," he said softly. She turned around, and Richard saw that she had already made her decision. "I've already packed my things," she announced in a surprisingly firm voice. "I'm going to leave in the morning before Mrs. Rodriguez carries out her threat." "No," Richard said immediately. "I'm not going to let you do that." "Richard, you don't understand. If I stay, she'll destroy you, your business, and she might even question your ability to care for Alex. I can't be responsible for that. Then we'll face her together. I'll hire the best lawyers, we'll investigate her past. With what time? Emily laughed bitterly. She has documents, Richard, she has statements, and even if they're distorted, the damage is already done. You saw yesterday's newspapers. In 24 hours, they managed to turn my pain into scandal. Alex entered the kitchen at that moment, still in his pajamas, rubbing his eyes. Good morning, Emily. Why do you look sad? Emily crouched down to his level, forcing a smile. I'm just a little tired, honey. Are you going to stay home today to play with me? Richard saw Emily's heart break at that innocent question. She looked at him over Alex's head, a silent plea in her eyes. Actually, Alex, Richard said, his voice heavy, Emily needs to travel for a few days. Travel? Where to? To take care of her family matters. Alex frowned, his precocious intelligence picking up on the unspoken nuances in the conversation. But I don't want Emily to go away. What if I get sick again? Your dad will take very good care of you, Emily said, struggling to keep her voice steady. And I'll think about you every day. At that moment, Richard's phone rang. It was Mark, his voice agitated. Richard, you need to see the news now. Rodriguez didn't wait until noon. Richard turned on the kitchen television, and all three saw the headline flashing across the bottom of the morning news. Exclusive, Sterling Nanny, accused of influencing cancer deaths in family. The anchor continued. Exclusive documents obtained by our report reveal that Emily Carter, the nanny who won the heart of tycoon Richard Sterling, allegedly negatively influenced medical decisions of family members with cancer, resulting in 2 deaths that could have been avoided. Richard turned off the television abruptly, but it was too late. Alex had heard enough and was looking at Emily with confusion and fear. Emily, what are they saying on TV? Emily stood up slowly, her legs wobbly. Alex, sometimes adults do things that seem right at the time, but then... Emily, no, Richard interrupted. Don't stoop to explaining your choices to anyone, not even to Alex. You did what you thought was right. But the damage was done. The mansion's phone began to ring incessantly. Richard could hear Eleanor answering calls from journalists, curious, neighbors, even from some shareholders of his company. Mark arrived at the mansion an hour later, bringing with him a stack of newspapers and a somber expression. Richard, I need to be direct with you. The story is spreading like wildfire. 3 major shareholders have already called asking for clarification. The legal department is being bombarded with questions about due diligence in hiring employees. She's not just an employee, Richard said firmly, but that's how the world will see it, and you know it. Richard, as your friend and advisor, I need to say, you have to make a choice. Either you protect your company and your son, or... What? Mark looked meaningfully at Emily. Or you lose everything defending someone that the public opinion has already condemned. It was at this moment that Alex, who was playing quietly in the corner of the kitchen, got up and walked over to Emily. Emily, are you going to have to leave because of the television? Emily crouched down again, taking his little hands in hers. Alex, sometimes adult people make mistakes, and sometimes those mistakes mean we can't stay near the people we love. But you didn't make any mistakes with me. You made me happy again. The tears that Emily had been holding back finally escaped. And you made me happy too, honey. More happy than I thought I could be again. Richard watched the farewell between the two, feeling his world crumble. When he saw Alex hug Emily and whisper, "I'll always remember you," something inside him broke definitively. "Enough," he said abruptly, surprising everyone in the kitchen. "Mark, get out now! Richard, get out!" Mark left, but not before leaving the newspapers on the counter as a cruel reminder of reality. Richard turned to Emily, who was still holding Alex. "You're right," he said, his voice cold and distant. "You need to leave." Emily's eyes widened, not expecting this sudden change. "Richard, I can't put my son at risk. I can't lose my company because of choices you made in the past." The words came out like blades, cutting deeply. Emily released Alex slowly and stood up, her dignity wounded but still intact. "I understand," she said softly. "You're protecting your family. It's what a good father would do." "Emily, Daddy's not serious, is he?" Alex asked, confused by the change in atmosphere. Richard avoided his son's gaze. "Emily, I want you to leave today. Eleanor has already prepared your final paycheck." The coldness in his voice was calculated, a defense against his own pain. Emily nodded, understanding that he was doing what he thought was best for Alex, even if it destroyed them all. "I'll get my things," she said, heading for the door. "Emily, don't go," Alex cried, running after her. Richard held his son, who began to cry desperately. "Alex, stop! Emily needs to leave. I don't want her to go. I love her." "Sometimes loving someone means letting them go," Richard said, the words coming out with difficulty. From upstairs, they could hear Emily gathering her few belongings. When she came downstairs with a small suitcase, she found Richard and Alex in the living room. The boy had stopped crying, but his face was red and swollen. "Can I talk to Alex for a moment?" Emily asked. Richard hesitated, then nodded, leaving the room. Olivia sat down on the sofa and pulled Alex close. "Alex, I need you to promise me something." "What?" "Promise that you'll take care of your dad. He loves you more than anything in the world. And sometimes dads do difficult things to protect their children. But why can't you stay and help us? Because sometimes people like me bring trouble to the people they love. And I love you both too much to cause any more problems." Alex hugged her tightly. "Are you going to come back?" Olivia closed her eyes, feeling her heart shatter. "I don't know, honey. But I want you to know that meeting you was the best thing that ever happened to me." When Richard returned to the room, he found Olivia standing by the door with her suitcase in her hand. She looked at him for a long moment. "Thank you for allowing me to be a part of your lives, even if only for a short time," she said, her voice firm despite the tears. Richard wanted to run to her, hug her, beg her to stay, but the image of Alex crying and Mark's words about losing everything kept him paralyzed. "Goodbye, Olivia." She nodded one last time and walked out the door, leaving behind the only pieces of happiness she had known in recent years. Richard watched from the window as she got into the taxi that Eleanor had called. Alex pressed his face against the glass, waving desperately as the car drove away. As the taxi disappeared around the corner, Richard Sterling realized he had just made the biggest mistake of his life, and it might be too late to fix it. 3 weeks had passed since Olivia had left the Sterling mansion, and her world had completely crumbled. Settled in a small rented room in Queens, she survived on the sporadic jobs she could get as a home caregiver. Every penny of the final paycheck that Richard had given her had been used to pay off the most urgent debts, but the financial hole seemed bottomless. What tortured her the most, however, was not the material hardships. It was seeing Alex's face every morning in the newspapers, photographed on his way to school, clearly dejected and thin. The headlines continued relentlessly. Sterling's son, still suffering from Nanny's abandonment, and child traumatized after family scandal. Olivia knew she was being used as a scapegoat to explain the boy's visible sadness. It was during one of those torturous mornings that Carla Santos appeared again at her door, this time carrying a determined expression that Olivia had not seen before. "Carla? How did you find me here?" "It wasn't difficult. You left this address at the hospital when you changed your registration." Carla entered the small room and looked around with evident pity. "Olivia, I need to tell you something important about the Rodriguez family. Olivia sat down heavily on the only available chair. If you've come to tell me that they're right about me, you can save your time. I've heard enough. It's exactly the opposite. Carla opened a folder she had brought with her. Since I saw your name in the newspapers, I started investigating on my own, and I discovered things that will shock you. She handed some documents to Olivia. Remember Sophie, your cousin, the one who also had cancer? How could I forget? It's one of the accusations against me. Well, I spoke to the medical team that cared for her. Olivia, the experimental treatment that the Rodriguezes offered never existed. Olivia raised her eyes from the papers, confused. What do you mean? The clinic in Switzerland that they mentioned. It closed 2 months before Sophie's death. It went bankrupt due to medical malpractice. The Rodriguezes knew this, but they made the offer anyway. Carla pointed to a document. I have here a copy of the clinic's closing certificate dated March. Sophie died in May. Olivia's blood ran cold. They lied? Not only did they lie, but they used your family situation to test a new blackmail scheme. Apparently, they've been doing this for years. They approach desperate families with sick relatives, make impossible offers, and then use the refusal as a weapon for future extortions. Carla showed another document. I managed to contact 3 families who went through the same situation. All refused the Rodriguez's conditions to save their loved ones, and all were subsequently blackmailed when they tried to move on with their lives. Olivia felt the world spinning around her, but the statements that Mrs. Rodriguez said she had, the people who claimed that I influenced Sophie, distant cousins, that the Rodriguezes paid to lie. I have recordings of the conversations where they were coerced into signing false statements. Carla held Olivia's hands. Olivia, you never did anything wrong. You instinctively felt that something was wrong with that proposal and followed your instincts. You saved your dignity and possibly your life. Olivia began to cry, not from sadness, but from a complex mixture of relief and anger. All this time I carried this guilt, and they were counting on it. They bet that you would be destroyed by guilt and would never investigate the truth on your own. But why did they do this to me now? Why did they wait all this time? Carla hesitated before answering. Because they discovered that you were involved with Richard Sterling, and then you became useful to them in a completely different way. How so? The Rodriguezes have been trying to enter the Sterling family's social circle for decades. They wanted an arranged marriage between their daughter Isabella and Richard. With you out of the way, they're free to pressure Richard when he's vulnerable. The revelation hit Olivia like a punch to the stomach. They planned all this? From the moment you appeared in the newspapers next to him at the hospital, Mrs. Rodriguez saw a golden opportunity to remove you from the equation and position herself as the savior of Richard's reputation. Olivia stood up abruptly, walking to the small window of the room. Outside, the city followed its normal routine, oblivious to the fact that her life had been systematically shattered by people she didn't even know. Carla, why are you telling me this? Why do you care? Because I saw how you took care of your mother. I saw the love, the dedication, the sacrifice. And because I saw how that boy looked at you in the hospital when Alex was admitted. You're a family, Olivia, and no one has the right to destroy a family with lies. Olivia turned to Carla, a new determination shining in her eyes. You said you have recordings, documents that prove all this? I do. And I also managed to contact an investigative journalist who's interested in the story, Ron Miller from the New York Times. He's been investigating the Rodriguez family for months for other suspected schemes. How long do we need to build a solid case? If we start today, a week, maybe less, if we can get the other families to agree to speak publicly. Emily took a deep breath, feeling for the first time in months that she had control over her own life. Then let's start today. Meanwhile, across town, Richard Sterling was at his mansion facing his own private war. Alex had completely lost interest in food, toys, school. The boy spent hours sitting at the window of his room, looking in the direction of the street as if he expected to see Emily appear. "Dad," Alex said that night during another silent dinner. "When is Emily coming back?" Richard sighed deeply. It was the 10th time Alex had asked that question that week. "Alex, we've talked about this. Emily's not coming back." "But why? Did she really do something bad?" Richard looked at his son, seeing his own pain reflected in the small eyes. How to explain to a 6-year-old the complexities of reputation, business, social pressure? "It's complicated, son. Do you miss her?" The question caught Richard off guard. He felt more than longing. He felt as if a vital part of him had been torn away. "Yes, Alex, very much." "Then why did you send her away?" Richard had no answer to that question, at least not one that made sense even to himself. That night, after putting Alex to bed, Richard received an unexpected call from Mark. "Richard, I need to tell you something strange. I received a call today from Mrs. Beatrice Rodriguez. She wants to arrange a dinner to introduce you to her daughter." "What kind of introduction?" "The marriage kind, from what I understood. She said that now that you've gotten rid of the problem, it's time to think about Alex's future with a suitable mother figure." Richard felt a surge of anger rise in his chest. She said, "Gotten rid of the problem?" Exact words. "Richard, there's something very wrong with all this. The way she spoke, it seemed like all of this was orchestrated." Richard hung up the phone with a strange feeling in his stomach. For the first time since Olivia had left the house, he began to question whether he had made the right decision. What if all of this had been an elaborate manipulation? He decided it was time to discover the truth, even if it destroyed everything he thought he knew about the situation. Ron Miller, the investigative journalist, worked with impressive speed. In 5 days, he and Emily had gathered enough evidence to fully expose the Rodriguez family's scheme. The recordings were devastating, the documents incontestable, and 3 previously blackmailed families agreed to testify publicly. On Friday morning, Olivia was at the New York Times office, reviewing the final details of the article that would be published the next day, when she received a call that took her breath away. "Olivia, it's Richard." Her heart leaped at the sound of his voice. "Richard, how did you get my number?" Mark investigated. "Emily, I need to see you. I discovered some things about the Rodriguezes that I need to tell you in person." "Richard, if you're calling because you feel guilty." "It's not guilt. It's love," he interrupted, his voice charged with emotion. "And Alex, he needs you, Emily. We both need you." Before she could answer, Ron appeared beside her with an open laptop. "Olivia, you need to see this. It just went live." On the screen, a live news report showed Mrs. Beatrice Rodriguez being escorted by the FBI into a precinct. The headline read, "Blackmail Operation, Rodriguez family arrested for extortion and document forgery." "My God," Olivia murmured. "Olivia, are you there?" Richard asked on the other end of the line. "Richard, turn on the television. Channel 7 now." Minutes later, Richard called back, his voice altered. "Emily, where are you? I need to see you immediately." They met at the same hospital where they had kissed for the first time, a symbolism that neither of them missed. Richard arrived first, pacing nervously in the waiting room until he saw Olivia enter through the main doors. She was different, thinner, with deep circles under her eyes. But there was a new strength in her posture, a determination that he had not seen before. When their eyes met, Richard felt the same electric impact as always. "Olivia," he said, approaching slowly. "Richard, She maintained a safe distance, still cautious. I saw the news. I imagine you understand now what really happened. I understand that I was an idiot, that I let fear and social pressure destroy the best thing that has ever happened to me since Sarah. Richard took a step forward. I understand that you never did anything wrong and that I hurt you deeply when I should have fought for you. Richard, let me finish, please. He took a deep breath. In the last 3 weeks, Alex hasn't eaten right, hasn't slept right, hasn't smiled once. He sits at the window waiting for you to come back, and I've become a ghost of the person I was when you were with us. Emily felt the tears burn her eyes, but she forced herself to maintain control. And now that my name has been cleared, you want me to come back? No, Richard said, surprising her. I want much more than that. He knelt down right there in the middle of the hospital waiting room, ignoring the curious glances of the other people. From the folder he was carrying, he took out a small velvet box. Emily Carter, you brought light to my life when I was lost in darkness. You returned joy to my son and taught me to love again. I don't want you as a nanny. I don't want you as an employee. I want you as my wife, as Alex's mother, as my partner for the rest of my life. Olivia covered her mouth with her hands, tears now running freely down her face. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness after how I treated you, Richard continued. I know I have a lot to make up for. But if you give me a chance, I promise I'll never let anyone separate us again. I promise to fight for you, for us, against any adversity. Richard, get up, she murmured, extending her hands to help him. Not before you answer me. Marry me, Olivia. She looked at the ring, a simple and elegant solitaire, nothing ostentatious, exactly what she would have chosen, and then at the man kneeling before her. The man who had broken her heart, but who had also given her the happiest moments of her life. Richard Sterling, you are the most stubborn, proud, and infuriating man I have ever met, she said, smiling through her tears. His face contracted with worry, and also the most courageous, loving, and wonderful, she continued. Yes, I will marry you, 1,000 times, yes. Arthur jumped up, scooping her into his arms and twirling her in the air as she laughed. When he set her down, their lips met in a kiss that carried all the pain of separation and all the joy of reunion. There's someone who's dying to see you, Richard said when they broke apart. Alex? He's at the mansion with Eleanor. He didn't want to come because he said it would be too sad if you said no. Olivia laughed, wiping away her tears. So what are we waiting for? At the mansion, Alex was sitting in his usual spot by the window when he saw his father's car approaching. His eyes widened when he recognized the familiar figure in the passenger seat. Eleanor! He shouted, running downstairs. Emily's back! Emily's back! He reached the front door even before his parents and practically leaped into Olivia's arms. When she got out of the car, Emily, I knew you were going to come back. I knew it. I missed you every day, honey, she said, hugging him tightly. Dad missed you too. He kept looking at your pictures on his cell phone when he thought I wasn't watching. Richard blushed, but smiled. Alex, Olivia has some news to tell you. Alex pulled back a little to look at her with curiosity. Olivia knelt down to his level. Alex, how would you feel if I married your dad and we became a real family? The boy's eyes lit up like Christmas trees. For real? Forever? Forever, Richard confirmed, placing his hand on his son's shoulder. Alex looked from one to the other, then shouted with joy and hugged them both at the same time, creating a family sandwich that made everyone laugh. 6 months later, the wedding ceremony was intimate, held in the garden of the Sterling mansion, where Olivia had taught Alex to fly a kite. Only close family and true friends were present. Alex was the ring bearer, radiant in his little tuxedo. When Richard and Olivia exchanged vows, promises of love, protection, and true partnership, There wasn't a person present who doubted the authenticity of that love. During the reception, Carla Santos approached Olivia. "You deserve all this happiness," she said, hugging her friend. "Your mother would be very proud. Thank you, Carla, for everything. If you hadn't helped me discover the truth." "True love always finds a way," Carla replied wisely. Later that night, after the guests had left and Alex was asleep, Richard and Olivia walked through the garden, illuminated only by the moon. "There's something I want to show you," Richard said, guiding her to an area of the garden that had been renovated. There, among the rose bushes, was a stone bench with a small plaque engraved, "For Sarah, who taught us that love never dies, it only transforms," and for Olivia, who showed us that broken hearts can be healed. Olivia touched the plaque delicately. Moved. "It's beautiful, Richard. I wanted you to know that you're not replacing Sarah. You're creating something new, something ours." He hugged her from behind. "And Alex already calls you Mom when he thinks we're not listening." Olivia laughed, leaning back against her husband's chest. "He can call me whatever he wants. He's my son now, as much as any child we may have together." "We'll be about that," Richard said, his hands moving to her waist. "Richard Sterling, we just got married 8 hours ago." "And I'm already thinking about expanding our family," he said, kissing her neck. Olivia turned in his arms, seeing the love and genuine happiness in his eyes. "I love you," she said simply, "and I love you. Forever." As they kissed under the stars, in the room upstairs, Alex watched from the window and smiled. His family was complete again, and this time he knew it would be forever. The nanny who had arrived at the Sterling mansion, carrying the weight of guilt and pain, had become the matriarch of a family built on true love, forgiveness, and the certainty that sometimes the happiest endings are born from the most improbable beginnings.